My name is Michelle Zuppa. I am instructor of English composition here at the college. This is a little picture of our author, Margaret Atwood, and the book with the Hulu logo. And I was really excited to find these illustrations. There is a Folio Society edition of the book, which is illustrated like this, and if you look at this picture carefully, you can see it's during the shopping. We've got Janine, who's heavily pregnant. We've got the handmaids ogling over to look at her with a little bit of envy. I love the way the wings look in these illustrations. I thought I'd just start by giving you some basic facts about the novel. It was written by a Canadian author, Margaret Atwood. I don't know if you guys knew that she's Canadian. It was also published in 1985, so it's been around for over 30 years. And in that time, it's never been out of print. I actually read it when it first came out. I had a copy of the book that looked pretty much like this. It had this cool fold-out cover, and I lent it to somebody and never saw it again. Millions of copies of the book have been sold during that time period worldwide, and it was the most read book in 2017. Does anybody have a guess why? What? Well, I don't think we are exactly making the bestseller list function. The Me Too movement. What else happened in 2017? The Hulu series premiered. That's definitely a big factor. What else happened in 2017 that might influence the popularity of this book? Did someone start his term as president of the United States? So this book is very popular, and it's taught in high schools and colleges around the country, as you guys all know. But it's also a book that's often challenged by school boards and parents because of the content, right? I'm sure everybody has a sense of why that is. So I thought I'd use this fact to ask you guys what you think about the choice of this book now that you've been reading it for a little while. Do you guys think it was a good choice for our first year success? Anybody want to weigh in or share an opinion? Got some. Anybody who likes it, what do you like about it? Yeah. Oh, go ahead, Tani.
It's all related back to things that happened in history.
It's all related back to things that happened in history? Absolutely.
One thing I really like just in general is like how the book, it feels like you're just listening to the main character's thoughts. It's very like a flow of consciousness, and it's easy to follow.
Yeah, we're definitely hearing the story from our point of view character. Anybody else want to weigh in? Does anybody not enjoy reading this book for class? Maybe all the people who are here kind of like it. So the book has also been adapted into several other formats over the years. The first picture we see here is a still from the Hulu series. Anybody here watching the Hulu series? Nobody? It's pretty good. Oh, somebody. You can see in the background the wall that's described in the book. We've got some blood stains and a soldier. It's a very different experience to watch the events in the book than it is to read them. But the show is really well done, and it's beautifully filmed. The show was also filmed as a movie in 1990. Has anybody seen that? I saw that, don't remember it well, but it received mixed reviews, so I haven't gone back to it again. Interestingly, the book has also been adapted into a ballet by the Royal Winnipeg Ballet. You can see Offred is wearing red and the commander is wearing a three-piece suit. And in 2003, the Minnesota Opera performed The Handmaid's Tale, which got very good reviews in the New Yorker magazine, which has high standards for cultural things. So it kind of shows us the staying power of this book, that it's been turned into so many different forms and lasted so long. The book has also become a symbol of protest. This is, on the left here, we've got a woman voting in the Costa Rican presidential elections, which took place in April. And as happens in a lot of places, there was a conservative candidate running who was very against same-sex marriage and gay rights, and he actually lost that election. Maybe some of you have seen the protests in Washington with Handmaids. This one was from the summer, and it was about the GOP healthcare bill. And at bottom here, we've got a protest in Ireland. Ireland just had abortion on its ballot. Abortion has been illegal in Ireland as part of their constitution, and they actually voted to overturn that, so they're going to be legalizing abortion in Ireland. And the show is also, with its new popularity and the election of Trump, and the series, it's become quite popular in the culture and on social media. Maybe some of you have seen this Of Putin meme floating around Facebook. There's also a lot of people who like to dress up their dogs as handmaids for some reason. It's a little hard to tell because the dog is light colored, but he's got one of those cone of shames and he's been draped in a red coat. So who can tell me about Of Putin and Of Dog? Is this naming being done correctly? Anybody? Offred is of Fred. Fred is her commander's.
The one with Trump is basically saying, that Russia with Putin is kind of overtaking Trump and taking it off like master.
Yeah, definitely. It's saying that Trump is Putin's puppet, is playing on the allegations against him regarding Russian. Absolutely. The picture may upset some of you. Some of you probably find it a little bit funny. But I actually wanted to talk about Of Putin. Should it be Of Putin? Yes, it should be Of Vladimir. And Of Dog should be his male owner's name, right? People seem to have a hard time with the patronymic. So it's always the first name of the man of the house. Some people have been counter-protesting, right? This woman's sign. I have no idea what real oppression is. What does that sign indicate? Anybody?
Women nowadays haven't really experienced the oppression that they, whenever she's explaining in the book, like even though their rights on abortions and all this, it's not necessarily the same thing of how it is actually playing out in the book.
Very good, yes. So that's her position, is that all these people who are dressing up as handmaids to protest Kavanaugh or the GOP healthcare bill maybe don't really know what real oppression looks like. So what do you guys think about that? Do you think people are being alarmist, or do you think people have a reason to be concerned?
Compared to other countries, we really don't know.
Okay, compared to other countries, we really don't know what oppression is like. I think that's probably very true. Is there anything to worry about that might lead to oppression? Yes.
Yeah, I think with like the changing political culture, there might be a reason to be worried about certain things.
Yeah, maybe there is. I think maybe some of us might differ on that, but I think both the protesters and the people who are saying that have some validity to their opinions. Okay, maybe some of you saw this image making the rounds on Facebook. This was the Handmaid's Tale sexy Halloween costume. No. We tend to overdo the sexy costumes. What does everyone think about the idea of a handmade costume is sexy? No? Do you think there might be evidence for this in the book? Do you think the commander thinks Offred is sexy? Right? He's sneaking her into his study to play Scrabble, right?
But he said that he doesn't really have a connection with his wife, so maybe since she's there, and everything that's going on, he's just looking for a connection with somebody just human, like the war and everything.
Yeah, she likes to read it like that, like it's an emotional thing he's looking for. But on the show in particular, they do play with this idea that the handmaids, even though they're supposed to be pure and only for having babies, a lot of the commanders are actually having affairs with their handmaids. And the handmaids are pretty much in a position where they can't say no. And that's why was so much outrage about this costume, because the handmaids are, in essence, breeding slaves. They don't have the right to say no, so fetishizing the look. And there was so much outrage over this costume that it was pulled. These other two images, these are both from the show, the Nolite de Bastardes Carborundorum. What does that mean in English? Don't let the bastards grind you down. In the show, they do a little voiceover where she adds bitches to it. It's kind of a feel-good moment in the show, and so is Blessed Be the Fruit Loops. So you might be seeing these on Facebook or on T-shirts. The show is good. You should watch it if you have time, if you're looking for a show. Okay, so going over some basics about the novel and what kind of work it is. It fits into the genre of dystopian fiction, which means that it's taking extremes, or it's taking political trends and imagining them out to extremes, right? That's what's happening in The Handmaid's Tale. And some other books in the genre include 1984. Has anybody read 1984? Susie? What about The Hunger Games? Has anybody read or watched The Hunger Games? Right, so this kind of fiction, it's not meant to be, well, this is what the world is like. It's meant to make us think about things in our society. Using The Hunger Games as an example, it's asking us to think about how we use reality TV. It's asking us to think about, income inequality and why some people are so wealthy and some people are so poor. So what's The Handmaid's Tale asking us to think about? Reproductive rights, and what else? Religious society. What else? Political right. And not just reproductive rights, but women's rights in general, I think is where I was going with my questions. Dystopian fiction is part of the larger science fiction genre in general, but Margaret Atwood doesn't like for The Handmaid's Tale to be called science fiction. She prefers the term speculative fiction. It's important to her that it's not a made-up science fiction world taking place on another planet with, invented beings, but that it's taking place here in America. Does anybody know where the novel actually is taking place? Boston, Massachusetts. And the people in it are human, right? In fact, I know in my section, some of the students were saying that Offred is very relatable as a normal woman with a job and a husband and a kid. And another thing this novel is the literature of witness, right? Offred is describing what's happening to her, and this is something that people sometimes do after these kind of events take place, or maybe a diary will be found from somebody who doesn't survive these events. And it talks about reading a lot of Gulag, the Soviet prison system memoirs, in part of her preparations for this book. And an current example of witness literature is The Hate You Give, which is about somebody who witnesses a police shooting. So I want to start off by saying that we were robbed. Oh, darn, I meant to bring my cattle prod and I forgot it. So I thought this would give us occasion just to briefly review the roles. In Gilead, I'm dressed up as Aunt Lydia here. I have my cattle prod. I'm using it to keep my handmaid in line. And the ants wear brown. Why do you think the ants wear brown? It's a callback to the Nazis. They're kind of like do you guys know what a capo is? Capos were Jews in the concentration camp or ghettos who were put in charge of other Jews. So the ants are, maybe they're true believers, maybe they're opportunists, but they're there to train the handmaids and keep them in line, and they can torture them. Wives are the highest ranking women in Gilead. They wear blue. Does anybody know why the wives wear blue? It's a nice color. It is a nice color, especially Susie's very nice dress. So blue is the color of the Virgin Mary. That's why the wives wear blue. And that has additional significance here, not just in the idea that the wives are religiously pure enough to be in that exalted position, but most of the wives are infertile, right? And if they get a baby, how are they going to get a baby? Through the handmaid. So they're going to get a baby without giving birth. Commanders wear black suits, and his suit isn't very, Dustin didn't have to do a lot to dress up for this Halloween costume contest in which we were robbed. Marthas wear green to kind of fade into the background. Marthas are single women who are religious enough to be trustworthy in a household. They're maids and cooks. And the show does something really cool with Marthas in that they show one woman who was a very skilled and highly respected doctor is kind of brought out of her Martha costume for one day to try and save a sick baby. And it makes you think about, you know, if you take all the women who are working right now and you turn them into one of these roles, what happens to all that experience and knowledge and human potential, right? That, you know, this isn't just a costume game, but it's about people who actually have a lot to contribute in our society not being allowed to contribute anymore because they're women. And we also had English professor Jessica Dean dressed up as an unwoman. The unwomen work in the colonies. What do you guys know what the colonies are? They're not mentioned a lot in the text. They're work camps, yes. They're like concentration camps. Some of them are made to clean up toxic waste and radioactive waste, so they have a very short lifespan. And these are women who are not capable of fitting into one of these roles in Gilead. And these people are given a choice. Like Offred is allowed to choose between becoming a handmaid or going to the colonies. There are some other colonies where farming and factory work is performed, but these people are basically worked to death. And anybody who doesn't want to go along is sent out there. And this lovely Econo wife in our picture is wearing stripes. Why do you think she's wearing stripes? No. Okay, so Econo wives are married to low-ranking men who are not at the rank of commanders. So they don't get Marthas and they don't get handmaids. They have to do all the jobs themselves, so they wear red and green stripes. And we also have a picture of Nick, the household driver. He wasn't able to make it to our costume contest, but I didn't want him left out in the discussion of roles. So the ordinary men of Gilead are doing all the jobs, right? Anything from receptionist at Offred's doctor's office to grocery store clerk. Women can't do anything anymore. So the men's costumes are not quite so defining, but in all these roles, who do you think is coming out ahead? The commanders. Maybe who do you think has it better off? The wife or the low-ranking man like a driver? The driver. How come the driver? The driver lives alone in an apartment over a garage. Say that louder?
I don't think so, Chief.
You don't think so? You don't think the driver is coming out ahead?
No.
Yeah, I mean, or Offred's husband, Luke, right? He's another example of how Gilead treats men who are not commanders. We don't know what happened to him, but she thinks he's probably dead. So it's important to remember that this structure is only benefiting a few people, and the wives are probably getting more benefit than some of the people lower on the class structure, even though they have had to give some things up. So here's another picture from the illustrated book. I notice that the commander is older on the show. He's played by a younger man, and those words are just really high point words. Okay, so in writing this book, Atwood wanted to ask some questions, and one of them was, if the United States were to have a totalitarianism, what kind of totalitarianism would it be? Does anybody know what that word totalitarianism means?
It means one person has total control.
Right, well, it doesn't have to be one person. It can be like that's tyranny, where a tyrant has total control. It can be like a central governing board, but yes, the total control is really the important part. And the picture I picked for this slide is from Tiananmen Square in China in 1989. Does anybody know about Tiananmen Square? Susie? It was before most of you were born. So China had a pro-democracy movement develop in the late 1980s, and tens of thousands of people turned out to this central location, Tiananmen Square, to protest for democracy. And the communist totalitarian state of China came out with tanks. This is a picture from the BBC, and they opened fire on the protesters, and tens of thousands of people were killed. So that's one. The idea of killing people who are fighting back is a key feature of a totalitarian regime. In a democracy, we're allowed to protest, but in other forms of repressive governments, we're not. So in answering this question about what kind of totalitarianism be. Atwood knew right away that in the United States, it would not be a godless communist regime. Does anybody have any thoughts on that? So, the United States is the most religious, westernized industrial country in the world. Religion is more important here than it is in some other European countries where atheistic communism took place. And Atwood also studied the 17th century Puritans who had a theocracy in Massachusetts where she set the novel. And that greatly influenced her. The Gilead regime, a lot of it is coming from Puritan religious tenets. The idea that everything is God's will is puritanical. The harsh judgment of people who are not meeting the religious standards, right? The Puritans gave us the stockade, where people who misbehaved were, locked up and people could come by and throw rotten vegetables at them. The Puritans, did anybody read the Scarlet Letter in high school? So they gave us the Scarlet Letter for adulteresses. You were branded for life, basically. They gave us the Salem witch trials, which is what this picture is showing. Although I think if someone could actually shoot lightning from her hands like that, she could probably get out of being tried as a witch. Atwood had an ancestor who was hanged as a witch. She was known in Atwood's family as Half-Hanged Mary. She wasn't hanged properly and she didn't die, so she got to live according to their rules. So this was a huge influence on her in writing the novel. She also spent time in Berlin while writing the novel at the very beginning. And right before, or a few years earlier, she had visited Afghanistan. And in Berlin, this was during the Cold War when West Berlin was the Free State and East Berlin was communist controlled. And she said that it really gave her a feeling of what it's like to be in a totalitarian state, even though she wasn't in East Berlin. They would do things like fly the fighter jets over the city and set off sonic booms, which is a very scary thing to hear. And you could see the guards and people had a certain level of fear. So that influenced her writing. And when she was visiting Afghanistan, this was before the war with the Soviet Union and before the Taliban. So it wasn't a theocracy yet, but it still was heavily influenced by Muslim culture. And she said that while she was there, even though people were very kind and polite, they would not speak to her. They would only speak to her husband. So that experience, as you can imagine, is it's got to be weird if somebody's talking only to the person standing next to you. The last major influence on writing the novel was the rise of the religious right in the 1980s. The moral majority and women like Phyllis Schlafly, who would go around to college campuses and other places and speak about how women should go back in the home. These people were kind of reacting against the loosening of social norms, the cultural revolution that happened in the 1960s and 70s when we had the sexual revolution and much more birth control options and women leaving the home to go out and work and a lot of free sex. So this was kind of a pushback against those changes that were happening very rapidly in American society. And she also looked at Mein Kampf. Hitler wrote the book Mein Kampf about 10 years before he came to power in Germany. But in that book, he laid out everything that he was going to do if he came to power. And then he did all those things. So she took the ideas that people in the moral majority were saying about how women need to get back in the home and we need to have traditional values. And she took them at their word and to their extreme. And there's a line in the book that kind of sums this up when she says, Serena Joy is very upset at being taken at her word and stuck in the home. So these were the things that went into the writing of the novel. Another thing, when she was in Afghanistan, Atwood tried on a shador, which is the garment that Muslim women wear for modesty. And she wrote about it in a New York Times article about how she thought it was going to be really cool as a writer to wear this garment, and she would be kind of invisible and able to watch people without them noticing her, which is something writers like to do. They'll eavesdrop on you while you're having coffee or whatever. But she said once she put it on, her feelings about it changed, and she had this sense of suddenly becoming negative space, of being there and not there, of existing only as a taboo. So her experience really helped the way she came up with the novel's costumes. She also took the idea of nuns' habits. She even calls Offred's garment a habit in the book. And she talks about these Dutch cleanser ads. So she says as a child that this ad scared her. You can see that this gave her you can see the woman looks like she's going to kill the dirt. But she's also wearing something that looks a lot like the bonnet that the handmaids wear. And that's a picture of the shador. It's the one that doesn't cover the face, but it covers the hair and it's floor length. And that's a still from the show of the handmaids' costumes, which are a representation of the costume. Okay, so her second question, right, the first one was if we had a totalitarianism in the United States, what would it look like? Her second question is what would have to happen for totalitarianism to occur, right? Because it's not, people are not just going to accept radical change. And I've included a picture here. This is from Iran, right before the Iranian Revolution in 1979. And I just wanted to put this here to kind of give an idea of how fast this kind of thing can happen, right? This looks pretty westernized, right? People are walking down the street, the women are wearing ordinary clothes. And the Iranian Revolution is something that really did bring about sweeping change very quickly. So if this kind of thing does happen, it can happen fast, but it's not going to happen for no reason. So in the book, Atwood uses several societal pressures to show why people were willing to, not everybody accepted the radical change, but you have to have enough people to go along with it or it's not going to take root. So there's a widespread infertility crisis. And I think it's important to remember that The Handmaid's Tale is not about infertility, it's about totalitarianism government. And infertility is a reason why it's happening. And it also allows her to explore, some women's concern. There are also food shortages in the book. And these are due to environmental degradation and disasters. In the book, she talks about things like nuclear power plants exploding due to earthquakes, and you get a sense that the world has become extremely polluted. So I've included here on this slide a picture of one of the Utah wildfires. Everybody's been talking about how the wildfires this year are worse than they've ever been. And some people think that that might be because of global warming. So I throw this out here to food for thought, that if global warming gets worse and we have more environmental disasters, we might start seeing the kinds of pressures that can threaten our democracy. Another important rule Atwood had was that she wasn't going to put anything into the book that didn't really happen in the world some place or time, and that she was also not going to invent any technology. No imaginary gizmos, no imaginary laws, no imaginary atrocities. So when you guys are reading the book, does it feel real to you? Like, I know the situation is very real, is very weird, but do you have a sense that this is how it would be if something like this were to happen?
From a woman's standpoint, it is kind of scary to think that it could happen.
Yeah, from a woman's standpoint, it is. I know that's why the book definitely, I read it when I was your age, and it just grabbed me by all the feelings, I guess. Okay. Here's another picture from the illustrated edition. Notice how they do the sign for the butcher shop, right? The women are not allowed to read anymore, so we have to have this giant picture of a steak so they can know where they can get their meat. Notice too on the shopping, we have a widow, we have handmaids, we have Marthas, and we have econo wives. The wives don't have to come out and do the grocery. A question that always comes up with this novel is it a feminist work? So this is how Margaret Atwood answers this question. When you say feminist, do you mean should women have the same rights as other human beings? Then yes. But if you're asking whether women are angelically more perfect than men, whether they're better than men, then her answer is no. And the sign kind of sums it up, the radical notion that women are people. So what do you guys think about the way women are portrayed in the book? Would you call the book a feminist novel? Is it a feminist novel just because it's taking on issues that are of concern to women? Yes?
I think it just brings to light some of the stuff that's happened in the past. Like, a long time, not too long ago, women were still, getting in the house and have jobs and whatnot. And that wasn't, my great-grandpa lived in that era. He's still alive.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that, is it still around in today's world? A little bit. And I think that maybe she's just trying to bring life to it,
Yeah, it gets back to the idea of carrying things to extremes so we can kind of understand the implications. What about the female characters in the book? Do they strike you as real people, or do they strike you as stereotypes that Atwood is using to make a point about issues? Let's consider Serena Joy. Does Serena Joy seem like a real person, or does she seem like a caricature?
I think they seem like real people that, you can see historically in the past, in the present, and possibly in the future. I think one of the great things about this book is it shows how history can repeat itself.
Mm-hmm.
And if it's already happened once or twice in the past, and currently, what's it from stopping to happen again in the future?
Right. It's, the whole idea of having everything in here be a historical precedent, it kind of shows us what we're capable of as human beings in certain given circumstances. I think Atwood, as someone who studies writing, that her characters are very, very well drawn and human. She manages to show how Offred has sympathy for Serena Joy. And we get that scene where Serena Joy is trying not to cry while they're doing the prayers for the ceremony, and she's not able to stop herself from crying. So it's like, you know, what if you were a wife, even if you were benefiting from Gilead, just think how the ceremony would make you feel. The fact that she can make us have some sympathy for this character is really a tribute to her writing skill. Okay, and control of women and children. This is Atwood's words again. She talks about how when any kind of repressive government comes to power, one of the things they tend to do is control women and children, mass rape and murder, the idea of killing babies or taking babies and giving them to people who are more deserving of those babies. The idea of stealing babies. This is a way of achieving control. And this picture here is of family separation at the border. So I thought I'd throw out the question of, do you think that this family separation that we've been doing has any kind of control in mind? What do you think the purpose of separating families at the border is?
Scare them.
To scare, ooh,
Like the parents and the kids and to get them to stop trying to cross the border so their kids won't get taken.
okay, is a scare tactic for people who might be trying
Yeah, just send them
to cross the border illegally?
That's a multifaceted question that has many levels and not something to be easily discussed in a couple of minutes.
All right, true.
Show power.
Yeah, it's about power. Immigration is definitely a complex issue. Here are some examples of the kind of forced childbearing and abuse of women in history. Slavery in the U.S. South is obviously a terrible one. Right. Women they lost their names, they were raped, they were forced to give birth, their children were taken away and sold. We also had, in many Western countries, including the United States, women, particularly of, say, middle class status, if you became pregnant out of marriage, you were often sent away to give birth somewhere, and your baby was given up for adoption, whether you wanted to keep it or not. This is something that's kind of changed in the 1970s. The Magdalene laundries were kind of forced labor for women who were pregnant. These were Catholic institutions in several countries, including the US, Ireland, the UK, and Sweden, which surprised me. And these were very harsh work environments for women who were quote unquote fallen, whether through sex outside of marriage or, you know, pregnancy without being married. Romania is a particularly heartbreaking case. Does anybody know what happened with this in Romania? So right from the 1960s through up until the 1990s, Romania had a program where they required women, they wanted women to have as many children as possible. They outlawed abortion. They required women to have pregnancy tests every 3 months so that they could tell if they were having an abortion. But they didn't give them any help for having all these kids. So they ended up, towards the end of this, with having these huge orphanages where the children were not being treated well, and children who were disabled or sick were being abused. It was really a terrible situation. And there's also the Lebensborn program in Nazi Germany, where, again, women who were pregnant out of wedlock were able to give their babies, if they were of good Aryan stock, to SS families. So, and then these other examples here in Chile, Argentina, and here in the US with Native American children, these were all happening in the 60s and 70s, so not that long ago. So I'm going to stop here to allow for questions about the book or any of these issues. Nobody has any?
Right, so at the beginning of the presentation, you said that the 2016 election had something to do with the rise of reading the book. I wanted to ask, why would that have any effect?
Well, remember all the women's marches that happened after Trump was elected? A lot of people, particularly on the left of the political spectrum, believe that Trump poses a threat to women's rights. So with the show coming out and all the women's marches and Republicans taking control of both Congress and the White House, this book was in the news a lot and became very popular. A lot of people feel that it's relevant now. Yes?
In your opinion, why is this book so popular?
Why is the book so popular in the current time? I think it's both the fact that the show premiered and got a lot of press, and I think it's because Trump won the election and the Republicans won both houses of Congress. So it's kind of related to the feeling that led to so many women's marches. Yes?
So if Trump didn't get elected, do you think this book would be as popular as it is in today's society?
Probably not. I think the show is very good and it would have spurred some renewed interest. But I think the idea that some people anyway are a little scared about what's going to happen to women's rights is definitely making the book more popular. Yes?
We have to keep in mind too, it's globally, it's just not here in the United States.
Right.
This book is very popular around the world. There's other things going on in China and Russia and Afghanistan. It's not popular just here in the States. It's
Right.
popular globally because of global events.
Right, and there are also some Trump-like people who have been running for office in other countries. We saw it in England, the Costa Rican election. So these issues are kind of in everybody's mind. Yes?
Do you think women have less rights than men in today's world or not?
In the world as a whole?
Yes.
Absolutely. I'm sorry?
In what ways?
In what countries where women have very few rights whatsoever, like Yemen and Saudi Arabia are two of the worst countries for women's rights. There are a lot of places where women don't get an education, where women can't work. There are things like microbanking initiatives where if you give women who are stuck in the home a little bit of seed money to start a business, their status and their whole family's well-being starts to improve. Even here in the United States, women are still making 80 cents on the dollar approximately for men. Yes?
I have a question just a moment. For current event news, it kind of relates to this, I think, because there's a lot of talk about how fertility is on the decline.
Yeah, and that's happening for a couple of reasons. There are some scientific studies showing that sperm counts are declining worldwide, but also especially in countries like the United States, women are delaying childbearing. I think a lot of people maybe feel that they can't afford to start a family as soon as they would like to. Maybe they're not having as many children.
Do you think it could be maybe pollution, GMOs in our food, that kind of stuff?
I don't know about GMOs. Pollution might be affecting though. And Lydia talks about this in the book, how things like hormonal birth control end up in the water supply, and that ends up in our fat cells, and that does have an impact on our reproductive health. What?
I said it's expensive to raise kids nowadays.
It is
It's
extreme.
like $10,000 to have a baby if there's no complications or anything. You know, I have two myself, so it's
Right.
expensive to raise kids.
And just the cost of childbirth, and then
Formula can be anywhere from $30 or $20 to $30.
Right.
If you don't have help from like the government, you're basically putting a lot of money into the formula and everything.
right, and it doesn't get any cheaper as the kids go along. I think it costs. I just looked this up recently, like $11,000 a year on average to raise a kid in the United States. Over a lifetime, it's like, oh, I can't do that math.
And even the rise in like toy prices and stuff, because I remember being a kid, you know, you could get a Barbie and everything, like all the accessories for $15. Now you go to the store, you get like one Barbie and that's it, you know? I mean, I have boys, so I don't really have to worry about that.
No, but you probably have to pay for things like hockey equipment or.
They're not old enough, so
Oh,
it's like
okay.
do, but, you know, paying for daycares and, you know,
Yeah.
and preschools and everything else, and really gets expensive if you don't have help from, you know.
Yeah, daycare is hugely expensive.
It is really expensive.
And, oh God, my mind just went a total blank.
Michelle, thank you so much. I know people have 1 o'clock class. So.
Thank you. Thanks everybody for coming and participating.